The two Jills, a psychologist and psychic intuitive, reveal mind-blowing insights that turn psychology, self-help, and conscious teachings on their heads. Why? Because they work. Real help, sincere growth is here. Welcome to Psyched.
Hey Jill, how you doing?
I'm good, Jill. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really good. So the topic for today on Psyched is triggers. It has really been on my mind this week. I've been particularly talking to my husband, and he's just like, everything is triggering me right now. And I know that he's not saying it shouldn't trigger him, but he is still confused why these same old things keep recurring. And so I thought that this would be a good topic. We thought that this would be a good topic to say, you know what? Yes, triggers are there. They are going to keep recurring. The goal, I think people are like, well, I'm over that. I'm through that. I'm done with that. And that's not what this conversation is. This conversation is going to be more about maximizing your triggers, using them for your greater good, and really accepting that they're going to be there. Then what do you do?
This is big. I'm so glad. I do want to give you credit for recommending this topic today because when you said it, I'm like, oh, that sounds great. There are a lot of people that I know in the communities of spirituality and consciousness that are of the belief that they can evolve out of their triggers, that they can create a version of themselves through lots of trial and error and lessons and growth and self-healing and all these things, addressing their trauma and genetic wounds and get to the point of nothing triggering them. And I don't believe that that's true. So for those individuals, this part right here might be wait a minute, what are they saying? Like I'll always have triggers? So
Yes.
If anyone's in a depressed state, a compressed state at that idea, just give yourself a minute. Maybe come back to this podcast, take a walk or something and come back and hear it because I've been doing this long enough to know. And I firmly believe based on rationale, evidence, keen observation, intelligent mind, and a very savvy, soulful spirit of intuition that we don't get rid of our triggers. So to pretend that we do get rid of our triggers is a disservice to yourself and to everyone in your life. So I just want to put a little pin on that.
Really, I think that's critical because we set up this ideal, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, but you set up this ideal that you can never achieve. And rather than changing the ideal, you berate yourself. So for this, we're going to hear my dog a little bit today. My dog makes a little noise, so I apologize for that. But in any event, the idea that the triggers are going to be there, it doesn't scare me anymore. I think it really used to because they feel out of control, kind of take you over. You are not your best self when you're hit with a trigger or when a button is pushed. There's really, I think, in the early, before you start really working on triggers, and we'll give some examples of how to do that, our response to them is an overreaction. I think that's the thing to keep in mind. And that's why people want to eradicate them, because they don't feel good about them and they don't feel good about themselves while they're being triggered. Yeah.
This is going to be a great conversation. I already like where we're started, Jill.
I do too, I have to say.
So this new approach that you and I are talking about is that when you're triggered, there's really no, I would say no need and no benefit for the brain to say, oh no, there's that trigger again. So when you get over that with this new belief system, really, then it's a matter of, oh, there it is again, right? Someone, it's like, okay, so I've been here before, I can handle this again. And I like to be experimental. I like to be playful and almost entertain myself with, ooh, I know this loop. I know this loop of behavior. How do I want to handle it this time? Because I didn't like last time. Or I had that one experience with this trigger where I got over it in 2 seconds. And I've had another version of this where I got triggered and it took me 2 days. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I like to be playful with it. Yeah. And just really like, okay, here's the script. I get to decide what I am in this moment. And I actually feel like I detach myself a little bit from the triggering energy or experience or person, and I'm more in my own field in that moment. And that alone assists with not spiraling based on that triggering thing.
That's perfect. And I think, yes, we want to have curiosity. We want to have playfulness. We want to have awareness that I've been here before and that's okay. That I think gives you a lot of, it does take the over-identification with it out of there, in my opinion. I really think the most important thing that I can convey here is don't make these characterological. Don't make these about identity deficits. Something's wrong with you. Don't go into a trauma narrative. Don't go into a victim narrative. Stay out of all those interpretations of triggers and just do what you were saying, Jill. It's just like, stay like, oh, I recognize this. I've been here before. I think that is incredibly powerful. And I do think it creates a blip where there's a moment where you come back online, because the reactions to triggers in your own mind. So let's say you have a trigger where somebody's really offended you, or they've rejected you in some way, which is such a trigger. Nobody likes to be rejected at any point. That's something I hope you never get used to. Like, I don't want anybody to get used to rejection and be like, yeah, that's what happens. That's, But so anyway, somebody rejects you, and then the double whammy is you start to reject yourself. So rather than get in your own corner and really take that rejection on as you start to take it on as something's wrong with me and I'm triggered and now it's my identity. That question, it goes back to what's wrong with me is a disaster. But the trigger has you second guessing yourself. It puts you a little bit in a weak spot, a little behind the 8 ball. And that's not where we want to go with this. There's nothing wrong with you. Everybody gets triggered. It's a normal part of life. It's not a weak character.
Yep. Not a flaw, not a sign of lack of evolution. It's just another opportunity for you to be you in the midst of something that you wish weren't happening. That's okay. Be real with yourself about that. That self-compassion piece for me is huge. The part of me that is triggered, she needs a hug. She doesn't need, like, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to get upset about this anymore. That's the last thing. That's the last thing that version of me needs, right? So I hold on to myself. In those moments, I'm like, okay, where's the Jill that hates this part? Come over here. Let me hug you. while we discern what we're going to do in this moment and how we're going to react again. But for a lot of us that
absolutely love that.
Compassion for ourselves is, I think that's a really big part, because the part of us that's traumatized, it is wounded in some way. It's totally okay. That part of you may always be woundable. And again, that's all right. So I think the self-compassion is a big first step.
Yeah. If we're triggered by a boss, and my boss is kind of talking down to me, or there's an authority issue, and that is a big trigger of mine. Let's be honest. That's kind of where I went there. I'm very triggered by authority, but for me, it helps to see how this thing that is now triggering me was created just evolutionarily for myself. It's like, where does that come from? You go back and have some interest in it, because these things tend to be really old. We don't have that many reactions to things, and triggers are just creating reactions. So if we're having a reaction to rejection, it's not very different than having a reaction to authority. We're feeling the same things over and over again. They're almost not specific. So authority triggers something, but I like to go with the feeling of what it's triggering more so than get stuck on the content of it. I think that's where the compassion piece, because when I track these things back, I do get that this is a feeling that I had when I was really young. It often goes back to my childhood when I remember first feeling that way. I take the emotion rather than, I don't like authority. Authority triggers me. So that anybody in authority is going to trigger me. Like, I want to know what I'm feeling.
I like that, because I think what I hear you describing is part of that self-compassion. Is there's for you, and I think I'm this way too. I probably don't spend as much time on it, and I can see the benefit if I would. What you're describing here, that it's almost like there's a story of I want a story about why I'm triggered by this at all. And what I hear in your story is a story that's self-loving, not a reason that you're less than or not whole and complete, but a story of this is why this hurts me, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I think I do that as the youngest of, three girls, having two older sisters that were not always pleasant and not always respectful. There's a very self-protective, that mama bear kind of Jill. My story for her is that she comes up because I didn't feel like I had a mama bear in a lot of situations where I wish I would have.
Yes. And
Over
so
to
it's
the
almost
mama
like
bear.
you're it's not like reparenting yourself, but it's kind of like filling in a hole that was there. And that does feel much softer than going into a negative, being angry at yourself because you're triggered. A lot of times when you're triggered, there's a frustration that goes along with just being triggered, and then you're dealing with the actual event. So it is a double whammy if you're not paying attention.
There's
And
also
that's,
a
I think,
theme.
why they stick around. What's that?
Yeah, there's a theme to a lot of people's triggers. I know there's a theme to mine in terms of my irritation with somebody not being their best or being irresponsible or not thinking of others. I definitely have common sprinkling of themes of the things that do trigger me, whether it's somebody driving overly aggressively or irresponsibly or just thoughtlessly. I'm like, dude, you know what I mean? And again, on my best days, it's not triggering at all. But then another day, I'm just like, oh my God.
Yes.
Yelling at no one situation.
And I'm triggered by complaining. We talked about this. Like, I cannot handle, right? And it does make me, so there's one thing if I'm triggered, something happened to me, but there's another thing where if somebody else is triggering me, I want to blame that person. When I'm doing that, I also pull that one in. I'm like, okay, how am I the same? If I see somebody who's acting entitled, or if they're micromanaging, which is something that I do, but when people micromanage me, I don't like it. And then I'm able to say, oh, you know what? I do that. And so I create this balance. If I see somebody is anxious about something, and I think that's a stupid thing to be anxious about, and people do this all the time. They're like, why are you afraid of spiders? And it's like, what are you talking about? You won't go on airplanes. But we don't have patience for others people's shenanigans. So if you see someone who's anxious and you're triggered by it because you think it's the stupidest thing, why they won't cross the street or take the long way around a dog, whatever you think that is, look within yourself and find where you have that same irrational aspect to you.
That's beautiful.
Because
if there is one, and I don't feel like there always is. Where there is, I totally agree, because it's softening. Because when we're triggered, we're kind of irritated. Like if we were a dog, like the back of our ruff, we all like, it's like,
yes. But I say that because I want to stay away from blame. I do think that blame is fairly toxic, and a blame means you need to fix what you're doing rather than me working on my reaction to it. So I feel like if I can do that, I'm bringing the responsibility for my own feelings back to me, where they reside, frankly.
So big.
Yeah.
Big. I love that you said that. I was hoping we'd get to that part too. So thank you. I completely agree, because triggers can be very focused on what another person is doing and that they're the problem. And whether that's true or not, my point is it doesn't matter. It's that you don't get to be them. You only get to be you. If somebody's driving like an asshole, I just get to be me in my car. So yeah.
Yeah. And then there are the triggers that are, let's say they're more frequent. So in relationships, you can get to the point where I always used to say, when I'm really triggered, like, other person can't breathe right. It's gotten to the point where everything that person's doing is triggering me. And that is time to take stock, because in our minds, the triggers remain very alive and almost expanding, because we are not managing ourselves. And I don't mean managing yourself like you should just let things go and they're okay. You should really be looking at if everything is triggering you and your solution to that is that other person changes, that's legit not the way the world works. Nobody is going to change so you could feel better. And then you get in this very stagnant, stale state in your relationships where these triggers keep happening and you just keep tolerating them, and then you can get to an impasse there. And if you're at an impasse, the onus is on you to address it. Not to, a lot of people think, well, I just speak my truth, and they tell somebody else what really bothers them about that other person, which is not speaking truth. That's not what, I don't espouse that kind of truth speaking.
Me either. That's just venting, which is fine, but it's not going to address the problem. And sometimes you're by yourself. Sometimes when you're triggered, all you've got is you. So you got to talk I almost imagine it like part of me is like literally like on the ledge, like just ready to freak out. I've got to talk her off the ledge, right? I got to go, come here. It's going to be okay. So having those strategies that you create, again, I believe through trial and error, that can help you talk yourself down, to de-trigger yourself. I think it's really important to own our triggers, because I love your example right there that sometimes if we're not being honest with ourselves, then we can't be honest with others about something that is upsetting to us or is pushing a button there. So I'll take the example of with kids. I don't think it's a good parenting technique or a good relationship technique with a spouse or partner to pretend you don't have triggers or pretend you're not triggered. I think it's so much more, I mean, it can be comedic relief, right? If something or someone is pissing me off in my family, and I was like, oh, there's mom's trigger and she's about to pull it. You know what I mean? There she goes.
Yeah.
They all just kind of look at me like, how's she going to do it this time? You know what I mean? Because sometimes I have a great version of Jill that just like, I give myself a breath and I handle it with class and grace. And other times I'm just like, oh, really? You think? Just go at it. So I laugh at it myself at some point, hopefully right away, and they can laugh with me, but I'm not pretending it's not happening. And I think that honesty with our kids promotes closeness, intimacy, emotional intimacy in the relationship with our children. It's a winner.
It is a winner. And one of the things that really helps me too is if I can catch it, I'll be like, okay, wait, I was just triggered. If they're talking and it goes awry, I'm like, wait, we just hit a wall. Nothing good is going to happen from this point on. I could feel it. And it's really kind of magical if you could just stop in that moment and honor the trigger. And then you've almost diffused it in that moment, because you've allowed it to be there, you've called it out, and you gave it the space, and something new will happen now. A trigger means that it hits something in you that's going to start running a program. It's going to run a series of thoughts, behaviors, and actions that are all neatly packed and ready to roll. So that's what a trigger is. That's what it means. It's running a program. And when a program is running, and we've talked about this in other episodes, but when a program is running, your best self is offline. It's almost like that thing hijacks you. The trigger starts it, and it's so fast. And that's also why it's a trigger, the speed of it. And the more the path gets ridden, the faster it becomes. And then it seems like it's out of your control. So, as we've said a number of times in a number of different ways, but it bears repeating because the brain needs repetition and likes repetition. If you could just create that, even a comical pause, like, wait, I'm triggered. I don't know what's going on here. Just like put your hands up, like, and kind of stop the conversation. If you don't stop the conversation when you're triggered, you know exactly where it's going. You've been there 1,000 times before, and you will go there 1,000 times again. And it's not like you need an answer. And I think this is what you were saying earlier, Jill. You don't have to solve for X. You just have to acknowledge it, own it, call it out as what it is. And then the problem dissolves.
Because you have more authority over yourself. That's what that program is. And I used the word loop earlier. It is like a looped program. And to the brain, in so many ways, it can feel instantaneous. The brain is so quick that, oh, wait, I know what that is. That's that trigger. When that happens, then I do this. And it's almost like it hits play, and then this thing starts unfolding. So for so many people, I think if they're listening to this, it's really important that they really reflect upon the moments that you've been triggered and what we're trying to describe here. Because in the midst of it, it's much more difficult to respond, but we're really encouraging you to create a different you in that moment. And it does start with the acknowledgement and slowing yourself down. Mine normally begins by taking a breath, like, okay, I get the layer of me that's ready to run that program, and I am calling upon a layer of myself that can take the breath, slow things down. It's like saying to myself, whoa, 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 hold on. I know what you normally do now. Doesn't go anywhere good. I think so many adults just feel like, I don't have authority over that. That's what I have to do. I have to respond that way. I can't control myself, is what they're saying. That's a lie. Of course you can control yourself. And here's my standpoint as a fellow citizen of, we're all hanging here together next to each other. If you can't control yourself, we're effed.
Who's going to control you?
We're effed, right?
Yeah.
In the simplest matters of life, if you don't have control over yourself from your triggers, then we're really going down the drain faster than I want to, right?
I agree. And it's part of a very fast lifestyle that we have, right?
Totally.
So,
trying to make things efficient, which the brain is so good at.
It is. And
I have
go ahead.
Story, Jill. I have a story about you and me.
Oh no, what I do?
Oh no. It's beautiful. It's one of my many favorite Jill Langler memories. We were all together in McCall. It was after a weekend workshop that I hosted. And it was you and probably my car was probably packed. We were in the 5-seater car that I have, right? I remember exactly where you were sitting. I was driving. Deirdre was in the front passenger seat. You were in the far back right seat. And Deirdre was a pilot in the Air Force, right? She talks about planes and that kind of stuff. And we were talking about that MAX 8 debacle with Boeing and one of the airline crashes. And she and I were just geeking out about I wonder about this, I wonder about that. And then she was explaining to us about, well, actually the planes in that are sold outside of the US, they have a different setting for it. And she was explaining all this stuff to us. And I was, like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And you just very calmly, and I remember kind of seeing you in the rearview mirror as you're looking out the window and you said, okay, guys, some of us have to fly out in a couple days. It was so self-loving, so calm, right? And I think you were just noticing a part of you is like, I'm not enjoying this conversation. I know we have a lot of other things we could talk about right now. And if I'm going to put a vote on this, I would rather it not be this. Right. And I just go, oh, sorry. And then I was like, what should we, should we have a snack when we get back? Or do you guys want to go on a walk? I totally change
master at changing the topic, which was perfect.
It was beautiful. To me, that's just I love that example that you did right there. And I still think about it sometimes because it was so calm. It was so self-aware. It was so self-loving. And this is a group of people that love you and love ourselves. So we just all like, okay, good point.
Yep.
Done.
It's interesting. When we're talking about triggers don't go away and you bring up flying, it's really interesting because I was deathly afraid of flying. I didn't go anywhere for a very long time. And just getting onto the airplane, I would start to have panic attacks. So there were some major triggers there. And it wasn't just my thoughts. It was emotional, it was physical. Right? And so I was deeply triggered by this stuff. And there is a part of psychology, which is like desensitization. And I have a way of doing that. And it did break the program to such an extent that I actually don't have that anymore. So there is a possibility, and you're dealing with fears and phobias, and don't want to say that trigger has to remain, because in my own experience, that is absolutely not true. So I don't know what the distinction is there. I think part of us is saying the triggers don't have to go anywhere. And while they exist, you maximize them. Right? You see where they came from, see how they served you, see how they're serving you now. But when it did come to flying, that trigger is completely put to bed. I have no reaction on an airplane at all.
Because that was several years ago.
Several years ago,
several years ago.
I fly, I go on helicopters, I do whatever. So but part of what I was going to say before about the desensitization is part of what got me on the airplanes that allowed me to do it is just every time. So on an airplane or any kind of phobia you have, you're triggered every millisecond. It's not like somebody said something stupid to you and you're mulling it over and you were triggered by their insensitivity. This is every time the plane makes a sound, every time there's a smell, every time there's a little bump. So your brain is being triggered in a constant fashion every millisecond. That's what that phobia is. And I was able to slow my brain down enough that at each time it was triggered, I would just be saying, I don't know what that is. I know that I've always seen that trigger through fear. But let's say it's not fear, then what is it? So there is a way to work with triggers, which I don't think we have to go into here, but I just wanted to give people some hope that if you're dealing with that type of stuff, you can completely beat that.
Yep. No, I think I actually I've been hearing that throughout too. But I like your distinction that when I was saying earlier, like we're always going to have triggers, it doesn't have to be the same ones, right?
Right.
So it's totally, I love this example, Jill. Thank you for this. I'll give an example too that I used to hate being alone at night when my husband was traveling. Normally, I like being alone, but boy, in my imagination, earlier on in our marriage and in my 20s, I wouldn't sleep well when he would travel. He traveled a lot for his work. So we had a German Shepherd, but I mean, the German Shepherd, even though by breed he's intimidating, Riley was not intimidating at all by nature. So I knew he wasn't going to be the guard dog that somebody may think. Anyway, so my imagination would just really start winding up at nighttime. At some point, I think I just had to again, just kind of be there for myself, talk myself out of it. I think as we had kids, actually, because we didn't have kids until like 8 years into the marriage. We didn't think we wanted to have kids, but that was where I was almost like, okay, Jill, you got to get your shit together because now you're in charge of yourself and two other people and the pets. So you got to get over this, girl, because this isn't going to work. You got to be mommy tomorrow. You got to get your sleep. So it was almost like rationally, I was able to hijack those programs and just say, look, we don't have time for this. It's almost like this is nonsense. There's no monster under the bed. Just get to sleep, girl. And I love it. For me, it worked. So there's going to be a lot of things that can break that program. And now I don't have that anymore. I literally don't have it at all anymore.
Yeah. So I think that's a great distinction that forms of triggers will always be there. This is a place that happens and they do morph. And sometimes old ones come back. In certain circumstances, if your cup runneth over that day, maybe it's going to take you down. Who knows? But I think one of the things when I was talking about the desensitization earlier is triggers were feeling so out of control to me, and I understood them to be programs at this point. So I felt like if I didn't see the program, I couldn't work on it. So the way to see my brain in action was to go and look for triggers, because then I could see the program. And when I was choosing it, that made all the difference. And so I called it trigger happy, and I would try to find things that triggered me. And two things really came out of that. It was an incredibly empowered experience with triggers because I was looking for them. That's not a victim energy. That's a take charge energy. And so the interface with the trigger is different. I'm expecting it, I'm looking for it, and I'm watching my brain in action as it reacts to it. So an example would have been the plane. Like I would go on there and I'd be like, let's get on this plane. I want to see what's going to happen. I want to hear what it's going to say to me. And you almost like taunt it to come in and to speak to you. And there's a lot of mastery in there. There's a lot of sovereignty in there. You feel the choices that you can make. And it's a very powerful way to approach triggers, which people tend to avoid. The standard operating procedure is, I'm not going to like that person who's there. That person is maybe my ex. You go to a party and you're like, no, so-and-so is going to be there. I'm not going to go. because you don't want to be triggered by the way that person makes you feel. And your world can get quite small if you keep backing your way out of your triggers. So this is a more proactive way of doing it. And you go to the party and you're like, bring it. Give me what you got. I want to hear you. I'm going to listen. And then I'll see what I'm going to do about it.
That's a great strategy. Just really like, okay, what are my triggers? And I like that we're bringing in phobias within triggers too, because it is a form of trigger. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
So that I like the kind of like, okay, where can I put myself intentionally in these situations where I can be triggered so that I can address this and work on it and play with it. I haven't done that, but I totally see the benefit of that.
But yes, you did.
Yeah.
You went to a party that you didn't want to go. You're like, oh, I'm not normally. I remember you telling me about it.
Yeah,
You're like,
that's
I'm not
true.
normally.
I guess I wouldn't think of that as a trigger, but you're right. It was definitely an uncomfortable situation in terms of like, oh, no, I wouldn't go to this, but I'll go. Let me see what happens. Just out of
And you don't
curiosity.
think that would have been like you wouldn't go because you'd be triggered into feeling like you didn't fit in, or you didn't, like, who knows what would have come up, but you don't think that's
Maybe.
a trigger. You don't see that as a trigger.
I guess my triggers are, I get so hot. There's such a hot version of, all right, enough with this bullshit, Jill. And that, that to me is like a minor kind of like, not my favorite thing. A little cooler on the
Well,
Jill
for
scale.
some, it might trigger insecurity. They don't want to feel that insecurity, so they won't put themselves in a new situation.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. For some people, one person's trigger is another person's just, I'd rather not. But anyway, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
The airplane one, I do have another thing I want to add about that one, because actually this is interesting. It just came up the client session 2 days ago. One little part of our session was, hey, I'm going to be flying to India. There is a part of me that doesn't like to fly. What do you got, Jill? And she was describing to me what she normally does. And part of her self-awareness statement is nothing's going to happen. And what came up intuitively to offer her as part of a new strategy is, actually, that's not exactly accurate, because I don't think lack of reason and lack of logic is going to work in terms of addressing this, because that part of her, that layer of her, is aware that sometimes shit happens when we fly, right?
Yeah.
So, and I just felt her and I both just go, okay, yeah, right. So then it's a matter of, yeah, something might happen, but the chances of it happening are really slim. And then I gave her the idea of, can I visualize myself walking, me and everybody else on this plane, safely walking off this plane at our destination? And it allows you to center within a state of well-being and everything going fine, which the triggered program can't get you to. So you have to step aside from it. But to me, that's a big deal. Don't lie to yourself as you're trying to de-trigger. It's got to be real enough to go, yeah, you're right, this can happen. And for phobias, that's such a big one, because a part of that phobia is rooted in, I don't feel safe in this situation. So I think it's so real to just be almost like a blanket statement. You're right, this reality is filled with dangerous things. You're right. And you're saying that to yourself. And then that part of you feels heard, seen, and acknowledged, and the trigger starts to de-escalate automatically just with that part.
Right. And that's the part I really want people to take away. You don't really have to work that hard on the back end. It starts to de-escalate. Once the program isn't running, the program isn't running. You don't have to fix the program. We really are trying to just put a little monkey wrench into the program to stop it at whatever phase it's in. And look, sometimes that's going to hit the body. You're going to be in the program state when you're already in a panic attack. That train has left the station. Right? There's not a lot you can do there, but just lay on your back and wait for it to stop. But if you can get in at more the beginning, like the person you were speaking to was aware that this was going to be a problem, right? You knew going into it that there was a concern, but God bless, you also knew there's a way to handle it where fear isn't required. There's a way to handle it where you look at the triggers as triggers, not as what the content of the trigger is. So if you're just saying, oh, this is just a trigger and it's going to run this program, that's the de-escalating. That's what de-escalates. You can't pretend that nothing's going to happen. You're too smart for that. You can't pretend that this is 100% foolproof safe. In life, there's nothing that offers that guarantee. And it does feel bad when you're trying to cajole yourself into something that you really don't believe. It's strong arming yourself into something. So I'd always tell my kids, actually, when they were flying, they're like, oh, I'm afraid of planes. I'm like, no, you have fear. And that fear is landing on the plane. It has nothing to do with the plane. Right? That's what I was talking about a little obtusely in the beginning. It doesn't matter what the content of the trigger is. You just understand the feeling of it. It's more ubiquitous than you think. And so what people end up doing in these circles is, my only problem is my spouse. I'm going to get rid of that spouse and then I won't be triggered. Well, you know what? The next person's going to do it. Or my only problem is planes, so I'm not going to go on a plane. And then they end up avoiding social gatherings. So these things hop until you start to realize it's not about what I think is happening. It's whenever a program is running, it doesn't matter what the program is. I want to catch that. And that's why actively going to trigger yourself and then just saying, oh, I'm just being triggered. It's going to be a program to hell. And I can follow it to hell and berate this person or stay off that airline or get a divorce. Or I can just be like, I'm just being triggered. Let me sit a minute. That's all it is. It's just a trigger.
Beautiful. As we were talking, Jill, I was realizing we've had some of these conversations before. So as you were talking, I went back. And addressing anxieties, which was partly phobias, and that actually is an episode that people can go back to because that's a great one, on November 24th, 2022. Okay, so we go deep on anxieties and phobias and strategies and what is it, what isn't it, and the brain's role. So I love that today we're talking about the trigger aspect of anxiety and the trigger aspect of discomfort and not being the us that we want to be. I just wanted to mention that because you and I may have forgotten it. I did. I was like, oh, wait, we've had these companies. We've talked a little bit about this before. So this is a nice compliment.
It is. And I look, a lot of this stuff overlaps and it bears repeating because it's profound when you can do these things, but even I forget to do them. So if I'm not reminded, it's not really to talk down to anybody. The brain is a very smooth operator. So this is a way to keep things front and center, which is really what you and I are trying to do, to keep it top of mind so that you're ready for it before it happens. It's preemptive. Go look at the places, write down your triggers, go look at the places where you are triggered and go and put yourself in those situations, not dangerous situations. I guess that goes without saying, but sometimes you never know what people do. Don't run into traffic.
If there's a part of, as listeners, that as you hear this, there's a part of you thinking, oh, I don't have those triggers. I'm not afraid of flying. I'm not afraid of rejection. Just really let yourself sit with that for a minute, that there's a part of you that's telling you that you don't have any triggers. I think you're lying to yourself because I believe we all have something that we're afraid of. All of us. And that's okay. So if flying has never been an issue for you, I'm so happy for you. I would rather that hearing somebody else who's triggered that's different yours inspires compassion, not judgment or arrogance or discompassion of what's wrong. Because there might be a part of that person's energy field that's, well, I feel better about myself because I don't have that trigger. I just don't. I think that's kind of cringy and icky, right? So this relates to, Jill, what you were saying earlier, that we can all relate to something about, oh yeah, I have my own, maybe it's just a couple things, and that's great. A couple things that you're afraid of. Maybe it's not public speaking. Maybe it's not needles. Maybe it's not getting sick, but we all have something. We all have a form of kryptonite in our lives. And I think that's a beautiful, humbling status that assists you in being a more compassionate human.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's really well said. Because you're right, we can be very judgmental when we see other people. And look, that's an overcompensatory strategy. You have that problem, I don't have that problem. I mean, it's denial. And it can really make you misbehave toward that person and be quite intolerant to somebody else's things that they grapple with. And that's not your best self. Your intolerant self toward other people's concerns is not your best self. And if you were aware of your own triggers and realize that you have those same vulnerabilities and you can have the compassionate aspect of you, that is your best self. But if you're not owning your stuff, whatever you don't cop to still remains alive, and your only option is then to overcompensate for it. It doesn't go away by you denying it. You either succumb to it or you overcompensate for it. And neither of those really brings out your best self. Right? So it is energetically expedient to cop to it, because right there, you're a better you to you and to other people right out of the gate. And a lot of people don't like to admit these things because they're looking at it as more of a flaw. And this is not what we're saying. Everybody has brain programs. I don't know how they got in there, and I don't really care. But we're all operating with an operating system that has us pre-programmed most of the time. Most of the actions we take during the day are reactions. They're not new responses, they're reactions, meaning we've behaved that way before. So we're all doing it. And so nobody's better than anybody else really in that regard. And so to level that playing field for yourself, then you don't have to try so hard to pretend that nothing bothers you. There's this faux facade of strength. I'm not triggered. That doesn't bother me. And it's unnecessary. It's just, honestly, it's a layer. It's an unnecessary layer.
Yeah. The other form of trigger in some ways related to judgment of others. And I see this with when I hear people talk about those that have a weight problem or a high body mass index, or that are definably obese by the standards that we have today.
Yeah.
It's just one example of a group that's sort of ostracized. And well, if they just ate less, if they just, and I'm just going to pick this one as just one example, but it's so sad, and it's so oversimplifying a really challenging issue. I've learned so much about the role of hormones, insulin resistance. Calories in does not equal calories out. It's not a fair equation for a lot of individuals. And for some people, it has felt unfair their whole life. And for some people, it somehow gets unfair later on with menopause or whatever. It's just, so now when I see someone that is struggling with their weight, I just feel so much compassion, because I don't want to pretend to know I know what their problem is. I don't like the Jill that would be like, I know exactly what's wrong with you. I know exactly what you could be doing to fix this situation. It's not true. Number one, it's more complicated than that part of me would be willing to admit to myself. It doesn't get anywhere. Right? So when I can be that way with other people and whatever their challenges are, I can be that more understanding and kind of like, yeah, if this were an easy fix, I would have already done it. You see what I'm saying? So in my own challenges, I'm more forgiving, more understanding, I'm filled with more grace. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to try to address the challenge. It means I'm going to be very open-minded and open-hearted as I do so.
I think that's so important. I just was speaking to a father who was satisfied by the way his daughter was handling her college, her college
Freshman
work.
20? Oh, okay.
How she was approaching the schools that she wanted to attend. Right? She wanted something simpler. She didn't want to kill herself. She was actually very aware that her anxiety was really pretty rampant. And the father was in denial, just seeing her as entitled or lazy. Or he really wasn't attending to the anxiety that she had. And And so he had the prescription for how she could change, much like you were saying, with like, I know exactly what's wrong and I know how she can fix it. And she needs to listen to me. And so when we really unpacked this whole thing, we got to the point where he started to understand that the anxiety that he had for his daughter, that he actually had anxiety. He needed her to be okay. He needed her to go through the same list of steps that he went through, because his insecurity and anxiety wouldn't allow it another way. So he was micromanaging her situation. So he started to own that he needed her to do what he was saying because his anxiety was going to be ramped up if she didn't. And then the idea was, well, he needed her to change. And I said, okay, you're asking her to change. How are you going to change? Are you going to stop prescribing exactly what she needs to do? Do you think you can let her make some of her own decisions? And he was like, I can't allow her to do that because that would make me too anxious. And so the idea is, I like people to say, if somebody you are giving advice to is having a major problem and you think you know the answer, look in your life where you have something that you can't solve and find that we all have it. We all have a problem we can't get to the bottom of, whether it's our own physical health, whether it's our career, maybe our love life. We can't get that under control. So find that intractable thing before you go and give advice to someone else. I always say, if you're giving advice to someone else, it's probably for you. Kind of bring that in. So the way to find compassion to me in this situation is to find a problem that you can't solve for yourself. When other people are triggered and you're intolerant of it, go back and look for your own triggers.
Okay.
And work with them.
Yeah. I do want to offer a contrarian opinion, and I think I did this exact same thing in the addressing anxiety one, because I do have a different belief and I'm sensitive to it for a certain reason. There is this belief within spirituality and consciousness communities of what is often called the mirror principle, that everything you see in the world that you're bothered by or that you're concerned about is a reflection of you, and you have it within yourself. That can be true, but I also, from my own operating system, know that that isn't always true. If you observe somebody's anxiety, that doesn't mean you have that anxiety. So I just want to offer that for some people that may work better for. There are times that it's true, but it doesn't have to be true. You can be annoyed by somebody's selfishness. That doesn't mean you're selfish. Okay. You might be an incredibly generous person and you're so bummed that they're not being generous as well because you believe that's a better system to be. So that's one little thing I wanted to offer.
Yeah.
And then the other part here, I just keep feeling this really soft landing with just being more real with ourselves. My kids are at that same age as that father that you were talking about. They're 20 and 17, and the 17-year-old just graduated from high school early through an online school. So there is a lot of like, oh my God, what are they going to do when they're out of school? Oh my God, it is the one going to school. Oh my God, there's a lot of reasons to be triggered about the uncertainty and the unknowns about the future, right? So to me, the soft landing is, yeah, this is scary, isn't it? We don't know how this is going to go. That to me is way more
For both
authentic.
of you.
Exactly.
Right.
That I'm saying that to
the,
them. I'm saying that to myself.
yeah.
I'm saying that to my husband. To me, that's the nice soft landing pad of yeah, flying can be scary. Crashes do happen. You're right. Right.
Yeah.
The future is uncertain. Young adulthood and all the choices that feel like, oh my God, this could be the best life ever, and I'm really screwing myself forever, and I'll regret this decision for the rest of our lives. That realness with ourselves and with the other person. I've been having exactly these conversations with my youngest one, and she's like, I just don't know what to do. And I'm like, it's totally okay to not know what to do. The only thing you have to decide now is what you want to try first. That's all you're doing here. And she goes, yeah, that's true. And then she said, but I don't know what to try first either. Bless her, right? And I'm like, that's totally fair. I have ideas. Let's noodle them.
I don't think those feelings go away, was the point. So I'm looking for camaraderie more than a mirror principle. I'm trying to find my version of that so that I can be like, oh, I'm super nervous about the uncertainty in my. And when you look at parents a lot, there is a parallel uncertainty because the parents are very uncertain sometimes about their career situations. And they don't know if they take this job, if that's going to be the right job for them. Well, what's the difference in the college experience?
Totally.
They don't know if that's going to be the right school. So bring it into your purview in a way that you can understand that's relevant to you now so that you can really be like, you know what? I get exactly what you're feeling because, and to your point, be honest about it and say, I never have that certainty when I go to a new job. I never have that certainty when I picked a spouse or whatever it is. You don't get that. But to be in it rather than what we tend to do, which is we feel our uncertainty and we're like, well, I'm really uncertain, but you should do this. That's hypocrisy.
Yeah, it is.
So it's not the mirror principle. I'm not a huge fan of the mirror principle in that what you see outside is you. That feels like I'm beating myself with a stick. I want to find that. It's the same thing, like go look for the triggers. Don't wait for them to come to you and feel the burden of them. Rather say, you know what, there is a correlate in my life. It doesn't look exactly the same. It's a little different, but the feeling is the same. You can always find how many feelings do we have? Honestly, there are not that many. So there is a way that based on the feeling, not this circumstance, that you can relate really deeply to that person. And so that's the way I use the mirror, not as if shit's coming your way, you probably put shit out. That to me feels like shit. So
I do want to, I think it is an apology. I am apologizing that there are times, Jill, in your and my conversations where I feel like I need to have a sidebar conversation because I have 10 plus years of work in some of these topics.
Yeah.
And it feels really inauthentic for me when I hear something that I'm not saying something about that is totally antithetical to what I've taught, what I've supported in others. So there is a part of me going, I just want to make sure that the portion of my community that hears it doesn't think I'm like, because I think it can be heard by people that it was a certain thing. And I don't think that's what you meant. And it's totally okay if you do, right? I totally respect you. And if you're a fan of the mirror principle in the traditional way that I was describing it, I wouldn't think less of you. I wouldn't be mad at you, but it doesn't feel right for my Jill to just kind of go, oh, yep, you know what I mean? And there's a part of my audience going, wait, I thought she said to me 8 years ago that she didn't like the mirror principle. You know what I mean? So I apologize that might be confusing to people and I might be overcomplicating it. I do apologize if that's bothersome to anybody here.
I don't think
I'm
there's
just
any
trying
need
to be of integrity.
Yes, of course. Look, I don't think people expect us to be one person.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I can't vouch for what you're saying, and you shouldn't have to vouch for what I'm saying. You're Jill, and I'm this Jill, and there are things we're very complimentary on, and there are things that we have different perspectives on. That's totally okay.
100%. And I do feel like teasing that out because the mirror is a big obstacle and a big issue for people, because I think it's incredibly painful if your life isn't going well to be like, that's a reflection of you. That bums my world. So my idea for that is I'm trying to connect to that other person with compassion and grace. And I have to find a way to do it that's authentic. Beautiful. And in order to do
I think we covered it. Yeah, because I think we did that already in a lot of beautiful ways of like, okay, I can relate to that. I know what that feels like in my own version of it. I think we did it.
Fair enough.
Triggers.
All right.
Wow.
I think that's probably a wrap because my dog is going to start to go.
Okay.
Super crazy so much, in a minute.
So, yeah. Oh, I hope everybody got something really important about this, since we do all have triggers. I want everyone to feel like they have better choices and maybe the looped programs than they've been running at times. I love how we cover this from multiple angles like we tend to do, Jill. I love you. Great stuff.
I love you too. Did you hear the dog? Can you? She's going crazy.
Like, Mommy!
All right. I'm going to go get her.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.